That meant 45% of the time I voted against somebody who contributed money to my campaign. But that's something that you set aside and don't even look at once you've donned the robe and you take the job up. I can point to many cases where I have voted against business. A case involving Kentucky Fried Chicken involving putting fault into the system, depriving a worker of recovery when there was fault in their firing and their losing their job. I helped persuade the court to change a decision it had already rendered and to come out with a decision that put fault out of the system, and if somebody was injured while they were on the job but it was connected to fault, they still got workers' comp. That was a decision that went against every business. We ruled against Duke Energy on a case that cost them $7 million a year. I could go on and on with examples like that. So I maintain that when you get on the bench, your philosophical background, your R or D should not matter. A recent study by the Harris, very respected Harris poll, showed that the people of this country still want elected judges, and they still want judges to run nonpartisan. And that's how I believe in running for this bench, a nonpartisan race where everybody will have a fair shake in my courtroom. Doesn't matter what their party background is, doesn't matter whether they're a worker or a business, whether they're an individual or a company, they all will come before me with a clean slate, and that's how I promise to rule.
Thank you, Justice Stratton. Judge Sikora, you have 3.5 minutes.
I have said this several times on the campaign that after listening to Justice Stratton make her presentation, I would so like to be able to vote for her. But that then points out the major differences between us, and it is philosophical. We approach the issues and this race from a very different perspective. And Justice Stratton is absolutely right when she says that our election is nonpartisan. There's not a Democrat or Republican after our name on the ballot, and that there are not Democrat and Republican decisions. But there is a huge difference in the philosophical approach that Democrats and Republicans generally bring to the work on the Supreme Courts. And if you look at the decisions, the majority of the decisions, the wide-ranging decisions that have been issued by the Supreme Court over the past many years, you can see the difference. This court has leaned decidedly to the right. When we look at decisions like the Arbino case, that for the first time in history set caps on the damages that people can be awarded when they sue because they've been injured. Prior courts had said that the Ohio Constitution is very clear. It says that when you have an injury, you have a right to a remedy. And that remedy historically has been to go to court and have a jury decide what damages you should be awarded. This court agreed with the legislature in changing that. This court, for the first time in history, put a statute of repose in place, which says that you might even lose your right to sue a manufacturer of a faulty piece of equipment even before you're injured. Those are the kinds of decisions that show a difference in a philosophical approach. Now, I happen to have grown up in a union household. My dad was a carpenter, my mom was a seamstress. I'm in a wheelchair because I broke my neck when I was 17 working out on a trampoline. Those are life-altering things that change the way somebody will look at issues that come before him or her sitting on a Supreme Court. And that's the difference between having a court that's more progressive, that has Democrats on it with a more progressive view, and having a court that has only Republicans. All 7 members of this court are Republicans. I don't think there's anything inherently bad or good in being a Democrat or Republican, or I don't think there's anything inherently bad or good between the Republican and the more progressive approach of most Democrats. I think there is something inherently bad when we have a court that is decidedly leaning one way or the other. A court like the Supreme Court needs balance, it needs a divergence of opinion, and I believe that's how we get the best decisions.
Thank you very much, Judge Sikora. We now will take a break to have a few City Club announcements, and then we'll return in just a few moments with the question and answer period.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a debate between the candidates for Ohio Supreme Court. Now we would like to proceed with the question and answer portion of our debate. Holding the microphone today is City Club Outreach Coordinator Deborah Agasti. Let's return to Dean Mearns.
Thank you, Ms. Roller. As Jan indicated, now we're going to have the traditional City Club question and answer period. Questions that are addressed to a particular candidate will give that candidate 1 minute to respond. The other candidate will then have an opportunity to reply with a 30-second time limit. Questions addressed to both candidates will be answered with a 1-minute time limit for each. And as the moderator, I've been authorized by the City Club and the candidates to ask follow-up questions or to ask the candidates for clarifications. And before we begin, I just ask you one additional point of courtesy, and that is to make your questions just that, a question, as opposed to a speech punctuated by a question. That will ensure we'll have more time to hear from our candidates today. And so with that, let's proceed. And if people are too bashful, then I'm going to have to start asking questions. Yes?
I'm interested in asking both candidates how you would describe your judicial philosophy in both civil and criminal cases, and to illustrate that by reference to some cases that you have written or decided that would show us how you apply your philosophy. Thank you.
Judge Sikora, would you please answer that question?
That's a very good question, and I appreciate the opportunity. I've answered that in the past by saying I'm probably a progressive conservative. Now, what does that mean? I think I approach issues with a progressive point of view. I do look at issues, and I would certainly rather protect the interests of injured Ohioans over large corporations. I would want to make sure that people do have the right to recover damages when they're injured. I certainly want people to have the right to have access to public documents. But all of that has to be done within the context of the Ohio Constitution. That is the framework for everything that we do in the legal profession. And I think, it's very important that if there needs to be changes in the law or the Constitution, we leave that up to the legislature. We have to recognize the differences between the three branches of government, respect them, but also make sure that if, for example, the legislature passes something that is unconstitutional, we have the courage to stand up and say it's wrong, you've got to go back and try it again.
Thank you. Justice Stratton.
I've already spoken to my philosophy of judicial restraint in the civil area, and our court has many examples of cases where we have not hesitated to find a law unconstitutional if it is so. As to the criminal side, my nickname when I was a trial judge was the Velvet Hammer. I was sort of known to be rather tough on crime, but I feel that everybody who is in the criminal justice system is there for a reason, and we ought to also try to help them get out of the system. That's why I work so hard on issues of mental health reforms, and I work with the Strickland and Fisher administration to try to change the system of putting people in prison when they should be really treated in the mental health system. So I think my record on law and order is very tough, but hopefully compassionate, and I believe in redemption. Perhaps that's my missionary background coming out.
Thank you. Next question, please.
To both candidates, could you discuss your views on the recent Supreme Court decision, D.C. v. Heller, the Second Amendment, and gun control in general?
And we'll begin with Justice Stratton, a question regarding the Second Amendment.
I actually do not share my views on those issues because I believe that if you campaign on a particular view and people elect you for a particular view, that you will then perhaps disappoint them if you have to rule in a different way. And so I don't like to comment on pending cases or cases that have been decided. I will point to cases that I have ruled on. I think that is permissible. And we did rule in favor of the statewide carry concealed weapon that was passed when one of the cities tried to prohibit it being carried in their parks, which if we had ruled in their favor would mean they could have prohibited it everywhere. We believe that the Second Amendment gave the state the right to, and the police powers, the right to control citywide. But beyond that, I'm not comfortable trying to campaign on a particular issue because I do believe that that is what your legislature does. That is not what the court does. We need to keep a fair and open mind to any case that comes before us.
And Judge Sikora.
I'd probably take a little broader view of what judges and candidates can comment on. And in that case in particular, I would say that it was probably not much of a surprise that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the way that it did. Essentially, they said that people under the U.S. Constitution have a right to carry arms, but that the states can restrict or put some limits on that.